In mid-November of 2023, a police officer was accused of using excessive force while arresting a black woman in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, North Carolina. Viral bystander footage showed Officer Vincent Pistone punching the woman multiple times during an interaction with her and another individual at a bus stop in Charlotte. The clip provoked widespread outrage, but the police department offered a broader perspective of what had happened by releasing full body cam footage of the incident. In the video, which showed various angles and featured footage of the events leading up to the altercation, the woman could be seen striking the cop in the face. He responded with a swift blow which knocked the woman off her feet. The situation continued to escalate, with 4 officers holding the suspect down while Pistone repeatedly struck her with a closed fist. A few moments later, the woman was led in a police SUV and presumably placed under arrest. The police department initially claimed that Pistone's actions were consistent with his training and that the strikes were meant to gain the woman's compliance. But a subsequent internal investigation ruled that Pistone had used excessive force in the form of 7 knee strikes and 10 punches to the woman's thigh, including multiple strikes which came after her hands were behind her back. As a consequence of his actions, the officer was placed on a 40-hour suspension and required to undergo additional training. Number 20. Jennifer K. Holder. In January of 2023, police were called to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, where a 27-year-old woman named Jennifer K. Holder was accused of throwing a colossal tantrum after failing to pay for her chicken wings at Buffalo Wild Wings. Footage captured by an onlooker appeared to show Holder insisting that someone else had paid for her meal while arguing with airport staff. According to reports, the woman then attempted to open a secured door before confronting a Delta flight attendant, at which point security intervened. In another video, Holder could be seen pointing the hose of a fire extinguisher at seemingly terrified travelers who could be seen scrambling to get away from her. She then sprayed the extinguisher at an employee and security guards and was still wielding the device when police arrived at the scene. Holder sprayed the extinguisher at responding officers and continued to act non-compliant, kicking and spitting at members of law enforcement as they took her into custody. Several Delta employees were evaluated for respiratory discomfort but were cleared of serious injuries. After being medically evaluated, Holder was booked into the Clayton County Jail on suspicion of obstructing law enforcement officers, 2 counts of simple assault and 3 counts of simple battery. Number 19. Mario Cruz. In September of 2024, Oklahoma City police responded to a call about a man shooting a gun at his landlord at a local residence. 24-year-old Mario Cruz's landlord was trying to evict him after he had sent her a text message saying he wanted to kill everyone in their household. When officers arrived, Cruz went inside the house and refused to come out. In body cam video, an officer could be heard instructing Cruz to exit the home with his hands in the air, stating, "We can't leave until we talk to you." As the standoff intensified, neighbors were temporarily evacuated from their homes for their own safety. Several hours after the ordeal began, Cruz broke through an attic wall and opened fire on law enforcement, prompting the officers at the scene to shoot back. An officer initially fired a less than lethal round at Cruz in an attempt to disable him without killing him. Cruz fired at least 1 more shot, causing an officer to be hit with shrapnel before jumping down to the ground and walking behind the home, where he continued to ignore police orders. Left with no other perceived options, one of the officers fired his gun. Cruz was struck by the bullet, but survived. After being released from the hospital, he was booked into custody on multiple charges, including 2 counts of shooting with intent to kill. He remains behind bars as he awaits his next court date, and the officer involved in the shooting was placed on administrative leave in accordance with the department's standard policies. Number 18. Anna Marie Barnes. In 2021, a 34-year-old mother of 5 accused police of being needlessly violent toward her during a traffic stop in El Paso, Texas. Anna Marie Barnes was on her way home from her young daughter's birthday party with her kids at around 10 p.m. when she crashed her car into a small tree. She was charged with driving while intoxicated with a child under 15 in the vehicle and resisting arrest during search or transport. Following her arrest, Barnes denied being intoxicated when she was taken into custody, and she procured the reports to prove it. She also accused one of the 2 arresting officers of beating her in front of her children and breaking her nose. Photos of injuries that Barnes blamed the officer for show that she suffered from 2 black eyes, and her eyes were also extremely bloodshot. The woman also claimed that the officer who didn't beat her was shielding her from view so emergency medical responders didn't see what was happening. Police told a different story. stating in a report that Barnes fled the scene on foot and resisted arrest when officers attempted to handcuff her. The report further stated that an officer used a leg sweep on Barnes, causing her to fall on her back, and that she continued to resist arrest until after an officer struck her in the face several times with an open palm. Barnes sued the police, arguing through her attorney that they used excessive force. Along with a legal complaint, the lawyer submitted photos which he claimed showed that the tree Barnes hit suffered minimal damage and that her airbags did not deploy from the impact of the crash. The police department declined to comment, citing its policy of not commenting on ongoing investigations and litigation, and the current status of the lawsuit is unclear. Number 17. Ernst Delmar. A female NYPD officer faces a long road to recovery after being punched in the face by a repeat offender during an attack in the Bronx. In August of 2024, the rookie cop, Mary Faye, was attempting to break up a fight between the attacker and a group of kids when the incident occurred. Footage of the altercation showed the young officer telling her assailant that she was just doing her job and trying to keep the peace. Police identified Faye's attacker as 41-year-old Ernst Delmar, who was on probation in New Jersey at the time of the incident. He reportedly has a lengthy rap sheet consisting of a prior conviction for throwing a bodily fluid on an officer. In 2012, Delmar has also been arrested numerous times in the past for assault and burglary, including an incident in 2022 when he was accused of striking a woman in the face. In the video of the assault, blood could be seen streaming from Faye's nose, while other officers tackled Delmar to the ground, inadvertently pulling on his pants and leaving his rear end exposed amid the chaos. As he exited the courthouse with a stitched-up eye following his arrest, Delmar attempted to show remorse for his actions, saying he didn't mean to punch Faye and that it was a self-defense thing. He went on to say he was really sorry for doing it and claimed he was intoxicated when it happened. Delmar does not appear to be in custody at this time, indicating that he managed to secure the $100,000 bail that was imposed by the court. The current status of the case is unclear. Number 16. Devin Piotrowski. In late 2023, officers in Asbury Park, New Jersey, responded to a complaint about a seemingly intoxicated woman acting confrontational and erratic in a residential neighborhood. Upon arriving at the scene, officers made contact with the suspect, a 25-year-old former model named Devin Piotrowski, who said she had driven to the scene from Atlantic City to fight a woman at a party. She was uncooperative and repeatedly refused to comply with officers' orders to stop walking away from the scene, resulting in the decision to place her under arrest. As Piotrowski was escorted to a police cruiser, she began insulting the officers. She later claimed that she was suffering from a bleeding injury and needed medical attention, but there was no sign of this being the case. An officer nevertheless agreed to take her to the hospital and told Piotrowski to step out of the car, but she refused, saying she was unable to exit the vehicle because her head hurt. She repeatedly told the officer to feel her head as she continued refusing to exit the cruiser. As the police led Piotrowski into the station, she continued to ramble about how they had arrested the wrong person and complained that she was hurt, while her behavior suggested otherwise. She also continued to insult the officers, who made clear attempts to de-escalate the situation and had offered to accommodate her requests for medical attention in exchange for simple cooperation. She was charged with driving under the influence, criminal mischief, and resisting arrest. Number 15. Stephen Johnson. In January of 2023, a suspected serial peeping Tom was seen peering into the window of a woman's home in DeBarry, Florida, at night on at least 3 separate occasions. After being notified of the incidents and shown surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera, Volusia County deputies stepped up their patrol of the area. After spotting a man matching the suspect's description out and about in the neighborhood one night, police gave chase. Later identified as 29-year-old Stephen Johnson, he initially managed to outrun the cops and disappeared from view, prompting law enforcement to summon every available resource, including canines, a drone, and a chopper, along with infrared technology. They eventually tracked the fleeing suspect to a swamp where he was apprehended on suspicion of loitering or prowling and resisting an officer without violence. In body cam footage, a deputy could be heard questioning Johnson about whether he lived in the neighborhood and if he was a serial prowler. He said he lived nearby and initially denied being a peeping Tom, but later admitted to peeking in windows and said he experienced an uncontrollable urge to do so. When law enforcement informed Johnson's wife about the nature of his crimes, her immediate reaction was, "Again?" indicating that this was perhaps an ongoing problem in their marriage. The accused repeat prowler was soon released from custody on a $1,000 bond and ended up serving 52 days in jail for his crimes. Number 14. Mercedes Gallardo. Late one evening in January of 2023, police in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, pulled over a suspected drunk driver. As police determined that the man behind the wheel was intoxicated and arrested him on suspicion of DUI, his girlfriend, 30-year-old Mercedes Gallardo, refused to give her ID to law enforcement. She initially remained calm as she explained that she and her boyfriend had been together for a decade and that there were no major problems in their relationship. But Gallardo became disruptive and difficult as the police tried to explain why she couldn't drive her boyfriend's truck home. By then, she had admitted to drinking earlier that night and was showing obvious signs of intoxication. Instead of calling a friend or family member to come pick her up or accepting a ride from an officer, she attempted to walk to her destination, but she didn't get very far because she kept tripping and falling. Officers made another attempt to convince Gallardo to find another way home. At one point, they even called her mother, who agreed to come pick her up. But Gallardo became hostile and physically aggressive toward officers during the call, throwing one cop out of the way as they were trying to inventory her boyfriend's truck in order to have it towed. Gallardo was arrested on 2 counts of battery on a peace officer and 2 counts of disorderly conduct. When her mother arrived at the scene, an officer explained that he and his colleagues had already gone easy on Gallardo for her volatile behavior when she pushed her limits one last time by continuing to act violently. Number 13. Robert Darnell. On an otherwise ordinary evening in March of 2021, a police officer in Northport, Florida, pulled over the driver of an old rickety pickup truck for having a burned-out headlight, tail light, and tag light. The man behind the wheel, identified in court documents as 52-year-old Robert Darnell, responded to the officer's request for his license and insurance by asking what the problem was. He provided his driver's license but was unable to procure a registration or proof of insurance, claiming that the truck belonged to a friend from Texas. While running a check on the pickup truck, the officer discovered that it hadn't been registered in 10 years. She asked Darnell to step out of the vehicle, at which point he started to become increasingly enraged by the situation. After being assured that he wasn't under arrest, he exited the truck. But he only became more volatile and disruptive. He clenched his fists and yelled, making it impossible for the officer to get a word in edgewise. Robert eventually became so angry that he told the officer she would have to shoot or tase him in order to get him under control. When a tow truck arrived at the scene, he reportedly stood in front of the pickup truck in an attempt to prevent it from being towed. The non-compliant suspect refused to hand over the keys to the vehicle, but it was towed anyway. He remained argumentative and even dialed 911 on the officers at the scene, claiming that he was being harassed. Records show that Darnell pleaded no contest to having no insurance and refusing to sign a citation. He was fined $323. Number 12. Kayla Ryder. In July of 2024, police in Alliance, Ohio, responded to a call about a woman blocking a man's vehicle in a courthouse parking lot. Upon arriving at the scene, officers made contact with 31-year-old Kayla Ryder, who was accused of trying to prevent her ex from filing a police report against her. An officer approached Ryder's vehicle, knocked on the window, and offered her 2 options: to roll the window down or be physically removed from her vehicle. Ryder refused the officer's repeated commands to roll the window down, prompting him to call for backup. In the meantime, the woman burst into tears and claimed that the cops had beaten her up a week earlier while responding to a complaint about a fight between her and the man who was accusing her of blocking his vehicle. She attempted to flee and reversed into a police cruiser, then hit another cop car head-on. An officer smashed Ryder's driver's side window as she screamed at the top of her lungs. She refused to get face down on the ground, so the cops tased her twice in order to get her under control. While they were able to restrain her, they couldn't stop her from continuing to yell as loud as possible as she repeatedly demanded to be let go and ordered the cops not to touch her. This continued throughout the remainder of her arrest, and she was booked into jail on suspicion of felonious assault, resisting arrest, operating a vehicle while intoxicated, and other charges. Ryder reportedly admitted to being intoxicated, and her arrest came on the heels of another recent arrest on misdemeanor charges. Bond was set at $100,000, and she appears to no longer be in custody, indicating that she most likely came up with the money to secure her freedom amid the ongoing case. Number 11. Angelia Hall. Around 8:30 p.m. one evening in May of 2023, police responded to reports of a woman wandering in the middle of an intersection in Loveland, Colorado. Later identified as 59-year-old Angelia Hall, she was noticeably incoherent, prompting the decision to place her in protective custody for her own well-being. She was taken to a medical facility where she became verbally abusive toward healthcare workers and spat at nurses and a police officer. A 28-year-old officer named Russell Moranto responded with what the Loveland Police Department later described as inappropriate force by striking Hall in the face, causing minor injuries. Body cam footage showed another officer, Nick Hobbs, immediately intervening and pulling Moranto away from Hall, who demanded to see footage of what had just happened as a plastic bag was placed over her head to prevent her from continuing to spit on officers. Moranto was placed on administrative leave as soon as his superiors learned about the incident, and he was fired from his job 3 days later for unnecessary use of force. In a demonstration of transparency, Loveland Police Chief Tom Doran released body cam footage of the incident and reassured the public that he is dedicated to hold both civilians and members of law enforcement equally accountable under the law. Doran even encouraged people to watch the 90-minute video so that they could rest assured that they had gotten a full picture of what had happened, and he praised Officer Hobbs for stepping in and stopping the situation from escalating. Number 10. Takaya Young. During what began as a routine response to a call about a suspected shoplifter in August of 2023, officers were dispatched to a Kroger supermarket in Blendon Township, Ohio. They arrived to find the suspect, 21-year-old Takaya Young, sitting in her car outside the grocery store. Young allegedly refused to cooperate when the officers ordered her at gunpoint to exit the vehicle. In body cam footage of the interaction, she could be heard asking the cops if they were going to shoot her before she began slowly accelerating toward an officer who was standing directly in front of the car. One of the officers shot at the young woman through her windshield, and she could be heard screaming out in pain as the car continued to roll through the parking lot. The vehicle finally came to a stop when it hit the building. Police shattered the driver's side window in order to get the door open, but it was too late to save Young's life. Young's family, along with many others, demanded justice for the slain young woman and condemned police for how they handled the incident. In a statement, Young's loved ones described her death as the avoidable result of a hateful act. Blendon Township Police Chief John Belford referred to the shooting as a tragedy, but essentially maintained that the responding officers were the true victims in the situation. But Montgomery County prosecutors apparently feel differently, and in August of 2024, the officer who fatally shot Young, Connor Grubb, was charged with murder, felonious assault, and involuntary manslaughter. He remains free on a $20,000 bond amid the ongoing case. Number 9. Alexander Donta Mitchell. In July of 2024, Los Angeles police officers pulled over a 30-year-old black man named Alexander Donta Mitchell, who was parked near an intersection in his Dodge Charger while waiting for a friend. He was double parked, and instead of simply telling him to move his car, an officer ordered him out of the vehicle and handcuffed him. In a video captured by an onlooker, Mitchell could be heard saying, "What did I do?" right before the officer punched him in the chin. He collapsed moments later and was taken away in an ambulance. The footage went viral, angering countless viewers who agreed with the Mitchell family's allegation that the assault was completely unprovoked. According to the Los Angeles Times, the officer who hit Mitchell was using what's known in the policing world as a distraction strike, which is paradoxically meant to have a de-escalating effect by way of physical escalation. Following the incident and the widespread outrage that ensued, the officer was placed on desk duty as an investigation was carried out. Meanwhile, civil rights activist and Mitchell family spokesperson Najee Ali announced his client's intention to sue for the alleged use of excessive force. A few weeks later, attorney Brad Gage filed a legal complaint on Mitchell's behalf, arguing that his client complied with the officer's orders. The LAPD responded with a different version of events, claiming that Mitchell had resisted arrest by refusing orders to put his hands behind his back and grabbing at his waistband. In a statement, the agency wrote that by striking Mitchell in the face, the officers enabled themselves to complete the handcuffing. The outcome of the legal case remains to be seen. Number 8. Hannah Shepard. Late one night in March of 2023, police in Crystal Lake, Illinois, stopped to talk to a 35-year-old woman named Hannah Shepard after receiving a complaint that she was blaring music in her car. When questioned about her alcohol intake that evening, Shepard almost immediately admitted that she had been drinking. In fact, she said that she had consumed thousands of drinks. While this was obviously an exaggeration, the woman's behavior was telling enough for officers to conclude that she was intoxicated, but when they asked Shepard to exit her vehicle to undergo a field sobriety test, she refused, grabbing the steering wheel to prevent the police from handcuffing her. Officers eventually became fed up with Shepard's uncooperative demeanor and gave her one last chance to exit her car voluntarily. She chose not to comply, leaving law enforcement with no choice other than to forcibly remove her from the vehicle. After being taken out of her car, handcuffed and lifted to her feet, she adamantly refused to get into the back of a police cruiser, leading to another struggle. In body cam footage, the police could be heard repeatedly telling Shepard not to kick them while she repeatedly denied doing so. The cops ended up having to lift her off the ground and place her in the patrol car, and one officer sustained a laceration to their hand. Shepard was charged with one felony count of resisting a peace officer, causing injury, and misdemeanor DUI. While out on bond, just a few months later, she was arrested for hitting a police officer and throwing liquid on a firefighter in an unrelated incident at a hotel in Crystal Lake. In that case, she was charged with 4 counts of aggravated battery of an emergency worker and 2 counts of resisting a peace officer. The outcomes of her cases are unclear. Number 7. Yasin Simon and Alexis McFieldsamler. On New Year's Day in 2023, police in North Caldwell, New Jersey, attempted to make contact with an Acura SUV that had been reported stolen. The suspect sped off, hitting multiple vehicles before driving off a 25-foot cliff and landing upside down on a residence below. As one officer tried to quell the growing crowd surrounding the scene, another pulled his service weapon as the driver, later identified as 24-year-old Yasin Simon, fled the scene on foot. The officer chased after Simon, but lost track of the young man as he disappeared into the darkness. In the meantime, another suspect, Alexis McFieldsamler, was removed from the SUV and taken for a medical evaluation prior to being placed under arrest. Simon was also eventually captured and taken to a hospital for medical treatment before being booked into custody. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 6. Cara Ray Fuller. In February of 2023, police in Union Township, Ohio, responded to a call from a concerned bartender about a possible drunk driver in the parking lot. Officers arrived to find a man sleeping behind the wheel of a vehicle with his foot on the gas pedal. Thankfully, the car was in park and the police were eventually able to wake the man up after knocking on the window repeatedly. While officers questioned the man and searched the vehicle, his girlfriend, Cara Ray Fuller, exited the bar in a rage and immediately became confrontational and aggressive toward law enforcement. She demanded that the officers procure a search warrant for a vehicle, even though they had probable cause to search without a warrant, and she shouted in the cops' faces about how they didn't have her permission to search the car. Fuller's boyfriend, on the other hand, was calm and cooperative. He admitted he had drank alcohol and smoked marijuana earlier that evening and remained composed, even as he was being arrested on suspicion of DUI. All things considered, Fuller could have easily avoided an arrest if she had simply stayed out of the situation and allowed the police to do their jobs. But her intrusive and volatile conduct landed her in handcuffs, and she was taken into custody on suspicion of obstructing official business and disorderly conduct. Number 5. Akira Lewis. In May of 2018, police in Lawrence, Kansas, pulled over a 35-year-old black man named Akira S. Lewis for a suspected seatbelt violation. According to law enforcement, Lewis refused to show his ID and demanded to speak with a supervisor. The argument between him and the cops escalated into physical violence, and Lewis could be seen body slamming an officer in body cam footage of the altercation. Another officer, 36-year-old Brindley Blood, reached for her taser but instead grabbed her gun and shot Lewis, later claiming that she did so unintentionally. She resigned from her job shortly after the incident and was subsequently charged with aggravated battery. In the meantime, Lewis was treated for non-fatal injuries. He was charged with battery against a law enforcement officer, interference with law enforcement, driving without proof of insurance, and failure to wear a seatbelt. He pleaded no contest to battery of a law enforcement officer and was sentenced to a year of probation. In March of 2019, Douglas County District Court Judge Peggy Kittel dismissed the case against Blood after concluding that Brindley was being truthful about her intention to use her taser instead of her gun. More specifically, Kittel ruled that Blood had not acted recklessly. She dismissed the case without prejudice, which means the charges could be refiled. But the prosecution made it clear after the hearing that they had no such plans. In a statement, Douglas County District Attorney Charles Branson said that he planned to review the case to determine whether it would be appropriate to file an appeal of the dismissal. No further action has been taken. Number 4. Heather Lynn Marie Bachtel. In September of 2018, police in Great Falls, Montana, responded to a call about a suspicious woman at the residence of a tenant who was incarcerated. Upon arriving at the scene, officers spoke with a young woman who identified herself as Leanne. The landlord denied knowing anyone by that name when the police contacted them, and law enforcement eventually identified the woman as Heather Lynn Marie Bachtel. She was lying about her identity and birth date, most likely because there was a no-bond warrant out for her arrest for a probation violation. Bachtel reportedly refused to cooperate when the police tried to arrest her. She wouldn't let the cops handcuff her and began rolling around and kicking, causing minor injuries to 2 officers. During a search of her belongings, the police found a glass pipe and 2 syringes containing a substance that later tested positive for methamphetamine. Bachtel was charged with felony possession of dangerous drugs and misdemeanor counts of possession of drug paraphernalia, obstructing a peace officer, and resisting arrest. At the time, she already had prior convictions for criminal endangerment, partner or family member assault, revocation of sentence, and violating release conditions. Records show that she's currently on supervised release. Number 3. Timothy Armstrong. In September of 2021, a seemingly intoxicated American Airlines passenger went viral for his animalistic in-flight behavior, making him the latest in a seemingly endless list of unruly travelers who have made news headlines in recent years. 61-year-old Timothy Armstrong apparently believed his jet had landed at its destination, Salt Lake City, when in reality the aircraft was still more than 30,000 feet in the air. He demanded to be let off the plane, believing that he and other passengers were being needlessly held against their will, and began shouting at cabin crew members about how they couldn't hold the travelers while standing in the middle of the aisle. Armstrong reluctantly complied with a flight attendant's order to sit back down, then began growling and baring his teeth while holding his COVID mask in his hand. As he continued to growl, he began biting his mask while moving it up and down on his face. Meanwhile, he made various remarks about President Biden. He then stood up again and began rambling about how he and his fellow passengers were all being used as pawns. Needless to say, police were waiting to greet Armstrong when the plane touched down in Salt Lake City. Officers escorted him off the plane and he was taken to a hospital for a medical evaluation prior to being cited for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. The outcome of the case is unclear. Today's topic was requested by Maladaptive Daydreamer and Lone Trader 1. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Heather Locklear. In February and June of 2018, deputies in Ventura County, California, responded to domestic complaints at the Thousand Oaks home of actress Heather Locklear. On both occasions, she was accused of battering the responding deputies and being combative toward emergency personnel. The first incident reportedly occurred when members of law enforcement responded to a reported dispute between Locklear and her boyfriend. Locklear was accused of threatening to shoot deputies if they returned to the property. When investigators went back to the house a few weeks later to retrieve a handgun that was registered in the actress's name, they couldn't find the weapon. During another confrontation 4 months later, Locklear was reportedly extremely intoxicated and arguing with friends and family when police responded to a reported disturbance at her home. In that particular instance, she was accused of kicking an officer and an emergency medical technician. Locklear, who is now 63 years old, has a history of mental health and addiction issues, including a prescription drug scare and hospitalization in 2012. Following the various incidents that occurred in 2018, prosecutors charged Locklear with 5 misdemeanor counts of battery on a peace officer, 2 misdemeanor counts of resisting an officer, and 1 misdemeanor count of battery on an emergency medical technician. She initially pleaded not guilty to the charges, but eventually changed her plea to no contest as part of a deal with prosecutors. The judge imposed a suspended 120-day jail term, contingent upon her completion of 30 days in a residential treatment facility, along with 3 years of probation. Locklear was also ordered to abstain from drug and alcohol use during her supervisory period and was banned from owning weapons. If these outrageous arrests weren't enough, stay tuned till after number 1 for our previous release of When Dumb Bank Robbers Go Wrong. You won't want to miss it. Number 1. Glenadine Ruppert. In March of 2021, police in Mundelein, Illinois, pulled over an 80-year-old woman for failure to signal, hitting a curb, and having her high beam lights on in the face of oncoming traffic. Later identified as Glenadine Ruppert, the driver immediately showed signs of being under the influence, including not making much sense with her words. Suspecting that this senior citizen was intoxicated, an officer questioned her about her alcohol intake that evening and told her he could smell the odor of alcohol on her breath. Ruppert replied that she had like 1 drink 3 hours ago. When the officer asked Ruppert to exit her vehicle and undergo a field sobriety test, she immediately became defensive and uncooperative. During the test, she was clearly unsteady on her feet, and when the officer expressed a concern for her ability to walk or stand on her own, she became even more angry, repeating that she had only had 1 drink and blaming the person who prepared it for making it too strong. Ruppert refused to provide a breath sample and divulged into a tirade, repeatedly mentioning her age while calling the officers inappropriate names and insulting them at what seemed like every possible opportunity. As the cops attempted to take her into custody, she kicked, rolled around in the grass, and refused to put her hands behind her back. Backup was called, and the officers eventually got Ruppert handcuffed and placed her in the back of a police cruiser. Down at the police station, Ruppert continued to berate the cops and was completely uncooperative. She continued refusing to undergo a breathalyzer, and as soon as she convinced officers to take off her handcuffs, she threw her arrest paperwork everywhere. Ruppert was booked into custody on suspicion of felony battery to a police officer and misdemeanor counts of driving under the influence, reckless driving, battery, and resisting. She was placed under a year of supervision, and the charges were dropped after she successfully completed her probationary period. Number 8. John Mogan and Ashley Dubow. An Ohio couple were taken into police custody after uploading photos to their Facebook in which they posed with the money they'd just stolen from a bank. 28-year-old John Mogan and his girlfriend, Ashley Dubow, aged 24, carried out the robbery at the Savings Bank in Asheville. On the morning of August the 24th of 2015, Dubow reportedly drove Mogan to the bank after using makeup to conceal his face and neck tattoos. He walked in wearing a black hoodie and handed one of the tellers a note demanding cash. Mogan then absconded on foot with the money in hand. A few days after the robbery had taken place, the couple posted a variety of photographs to their social media profiles in which they could be seen with bundles of cash in their hands and mouths. A non-profit organization called the Central Ohio Crime Stoppers reported the suspicious Facebook posts to local authorities, who'd been struggling to identify any suspects during their initial investigation. Upon looking into the couple's backgrounds, the authorities found that Mogan had previously faced jail time for an unrelated bank robbery and had only been released on probation a month prior to the Asheville incident. Both Mogan and Dubow were charged in connection to the crime, with the former facing an additional 3 years in prison. Number 7. Michael Harrell. A man unwittingly incriminated himself while committing a bank robbery by handing the teller a stick-up note with his personal information on it. The U.S. Bank in Cleveland, Ohio was robbed on July the 19th of 2019 by Michael Harrell, a 54-year-old man who was a regular customer at the branch. Harrell slid the note stating his nefarious intentions across the teller line. Upon reading it, the female bank employee realized that he'd accidentally written his demands on a slip of paper that also listed his name and home address. The robber had reused a note that he'd received from the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles earlier that same day. The teller gave Harrell the money he demanded and even addressed him by his name in the process of completing the transaction. The robber subsequently fled the scene, and the teller was able to use the personal information written on the back of the stick-up note to identify Harrell to the authorities. He was arrested soon afterwards and, in spite of the damning evidence, ultimately pled not guilty to the crime. Number 6. Siegfried K. A man responsible for an attempted heist in the city of Osnabrück was labeled Germany's dumbest bank robber by the tabloid newspaper Bild. The robber, identified only as Siegfried K., entered what he'd thought to be a bank in May of 2011. Siegfried would quickly discover that the building was occupied by a private physiotherapy practice and hadn't operated as a bank for 17 years. Siegfried grabbed a hostage while wielding a plastic toy gun and demanded $13,500 as ransom. Upon realizing he wasn't standing in a financial institution, he instead forced a bystander to withdraw approximately $500 from a nearby ATM and subsequently fled in a stolen car. Law enforcement officers were able to lift the man's fingerprints from the toy gun, which he'd left inside the vehicle after abandoning it. With his 22 previous criminal convictions taken into consideration, Siegfried was sentenced to 7 years behind bars for the robbery. Number 5. Daniel Rains. A 35-year-old man from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, proceeded to rob a bank after having already given the employees 2 types of identification documents. Daniel Rains walked into the Metro Bank branch on 2nd Street on January the 6th of 2019 and stated an intention of opening up an account. In the process of doing so, Rains handed the teller 2 separate forms of ID. As he filled out the various application forms necessary to open a bank account, he suddenly proclaimed that he'd made a mistake and that he was actually there to rob the bank. Rains pulled out a gun and demanded money from the tellers, but was only given a small amount of cash before fleeing the scene. During the course of his attempted getaway, Rains accidentally crashed his car into another vehicle. Later that day, he was arrested by state troopers on suspicion of drunk driving in connection to the vehicle collision. He was also charged for the bank robbery after law enforcement officials confirmed his identity with the bank employees who'd handled his ID. Number 4. Hannah Sabata. On November the 28th of 2012, Hannah Sabata, aged 19, uploaded a video to YouTube in which she openly bragged about robbing a bank. The day before Sabata's video surfaced online, the Nebraska resident had gone to the Waco branch of Cornerstone Bank and made off with more than $6,000 while holding the employees at gunpoint. She fled the scene in a stolen car, which police would later find at Buckley Park in the city of Stromsburg. In the self-incriminating video she recorded after the robbery, Sabata recounted the crime she'd committed in great detail. The YouTube upload was titled "Chick Bank Robber" and featured Sabata's open admission to stealing a vehicle in York and conducting an armed robbery in Waco. The video, which also showed Sabata holding up thick stacks of cash, was set against the backdrop of music by the band Green Day. Sabata was arrested by police that same day and ultimately faced a prison sentence of 10 to 20 years. During her ensuing incarceration, she was found guilty of assaulting a guard and had 1 to 2 years added to her sentence. Number 3. Edna Flores. An armed bank robber who voluntarily gave the teller his state-issued ID was remanded into custody as he was in the midst of committing the crime. On January the 25th of 2021, Edna Flores, aged 34, walked into a PNC bank in the Humboldt Park section of Chicago with the intention of stealing $10,000. He wore a surgical mask, a dark-colored jacket, and a baseball cap beneath his hood as he approached the teller line and handed the bank employee a note. He had filled out a deposit slip for the amount of $10,000 and had reportedly written "No die packs" and "Armed" at the bottom of the ticket. The teller subsequently activated the bank's silent alarm and, in an attempt to stall the robber until the arrival of law enforcement, requested he fill out a withdrawal ticket. Flores was asked to show an ATM card and some form of identification, at which point he volunteered his temporary Illinois ID card. The ID not only featured his photograph but also listed his name and date of birth. Chicago police officers arrived at the bank about 12 minutes after Flores had entered the building. They positioned themselves behind the robber in line. He was arrested in front of the teller window and was subsequently charged with 1 count of bank robbery. Investigators discovered that Flores possessed an extensive criminal history, including more than a dozen past arrests and an array of criminal charges. Number 2. Luke Carroll and Anthony Prince. In March of 2005, after a pair of Australian friends had robbed a bank in Colorado, they immediately went to McDonald's to take pictures showing them with the stolen cash. 19-year-old Luke Carroll and Anthony Prince, aged 20, were in the United States on a working holiday and were staying at a luxury ski resort. They decided to rob the West Star Bank in Vail, a branch they frequented themselves. During the course of the robbery, they neglected to conceal their strong Australian accents and also forgot to take off the name tags that they were wearing as part of their work uniforms. They used emptied BB guns to make it appear as though they were armed. After bagging a total of $130,000, the two men used their ski passes to board a chairlift within minutes of the robbery. Carroll and Prince subsequently made their way to a McDonald's restaurant and posed for photographs with the money they'd stolen in hand. The pair were arrested a day later at Denver International Airport while attempting to purchase one-way tickets to Mexico. Both Carroll and Prince pleaded guilty to the crime, and they were imprisoned for 5 and 4 years respectively. Their failed robbery attempt was the subject of widespread mockery and ridicule, with media outlets dubbing the two friends Dumb and Dumber. Number 1. Orlando Henderson. A vault worker at a bank in Charlotte, North Carolina, incrementally stole $88,000 from his employer over the course of several months. He then incriminated himself by posting pictures with the stolen money on social media. In late April of 2019, Orlando Henderson, aged 29, was hired to oversee the cash vault at an undisclosed branch of Wells Fargo. Henderson reportedly took this new position as an opportunity to pocket cash from within the vault, to which he was working in close proximity. He then forged the bank's ledger to mitigate the discrepancies created by his theft. Federal prosecutors reported that the bank employee had made unauthorized withdrawals of small sums amounting to only a few $100s at a time during the infancy of his scam. As time progressed, Henderson started increasing the volume and frequency of his thefts, secretly withdrawing thousands of dollars on a daily basis. According to his FBI indictment, he'd set his own personal one-day high for money stolen on July the 15th of 2019 when he swiped more than $13,000 from the bank vault. Henderson didn't refrain from flaunting his newfound wealth to his followers on social media. In a series of photographs posted to his Facebook and Instagram profiles, Henderson could be seen posing with a brand new white Mercedes-Benz that he just recently purchased. He made the $20,000 down payment for the luxury vehicle using a portion of the cash he had stolen. Henderson also posted pictures of himself holding enormous stacks of bills. As the FBI had begun investigating the missing cash, the posts were used to identify Henderson as the culprit of the massive theft. Following his arrest, Henderson faced various charges in relation to his crimes, the maximum penalty of which was 30 years in prison and $1 million fine. Thanks for watching. What is the highest valued item that you have ever stolen? If anything, of course, let us know in the comments section below.